Today we have a very special guest who is also a friend of mine.
We're not ready to go yet, Chant.
Today we have a very special guest who is also a friend of mine, Earl Gray, the Chief Investigator for the Southern California chapter of MUFON. Welcome, Earl.
Hi, Chant. How are you doing?
It's good to hear from you. I'm so glad you're on the show today. Thank you.
Me too.
Earl, you went to History Channel's Blue Book premiere party. How did that go?
It was really wonderful. I mean, it was quite elaborate. It was more a party than a premiere for the show. They kind of had they had a mansion in Beverly Hills that they had rented, and they had redecorated the inside of this place, all period, piece furniture from early 60s, late 1950s motif going on. They had a jazz band playing period music. They actually reconstructed the set of J. Allen Hynek's office from the Blue Book, from his office in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I guess is what they were trying to go for, in one of the rooms, which was really, really cool. And anyhow, they really kind of went all out. I know it's, History Channel, they obviously have a pretty good budget, because they, it was a VIP party. I guess it's really the only party I've ever been to that was quite so elaborate, a Hollywood party like that. But they had the surviving members of the Hynek family were there. I got to meet Paul Hynek, who's a ufologist in his own right now. I noticed he did a recent interview on Open Minds TV, but he was there, and I got to meet Lindsay Hynek, J. Allen Hynek's granddaughter, lovely, intelligent woman, and it was just really a fun party. Just kind of it looked like the sky was the limit as far as the budget for the party went. There were, probably a good. I don't know, maybe 500-600 people that were milling in and out through the evening. And they even drained the swimming pool and painted the Blue Book logo on the bottom of the pool.
Wow.
We're talking oyster bar. They were serving us caviar. Yeah. They had a hosted bar, which is dangerous. They had themed drinks like the Hynek Comet, and I definitely had a couple of those.
So that show is going to premiere this coming Tuesday at 10 p.m. on the History Channel. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. They're and it's a really interesting show because it is a drama, but they're basing it on Allen Hynek's life. And that J. Allen Hynek, his whole the government hired him to be the head of Project Blue Book, which was their first investigation into the UFO phenomenon. And he started out as a skeptic, but you can watch him how he took this arc as he kept getting case to case that he couldn't debunk. And that really is the way that a ufologist is supposed to approach UFO cases. I mean, you're supposed to try to figure out every natural thing that could be on your own first. And if, it's sort of like the old Sherlock Holmes thing, you keep on attacking it, and, if it holds up and there's a preponderance of evidence and it doesn't match any other natural occurrence or natural phenomena that it could have possibly been, then you've got your unidentified, your unknown. And at MUFON, who I work for, we use Hynek's principles. We use his classifications in our cases, and we use his method, which is more or less to the scientific method. You know, Occam's razor is my best friend, and was J. Allen Hynek's best friend too. The big difference is with Hynek, he began as a skeptic. I think the government really wanted to disprove for themselves and for the public that it wasn't a real phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon, that it was, misidentified stuff, hoaxes, and just people with large imaginations. And Hynek famously, he was the guy that came up with a swamp gas phrase for this one UFO, where there was neither a swamp in the area nor was there gas.
Right.
But,
yeah.
Yeah. But for himself, he kept on bumping into cases that he just could not debunk. And they held up, and the deeper he went into them, the more solid they became. And he finally became the father of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He decided we are not alone, and
right, yeah,
that wasn't what the government was looking for.
Did they run any of the shows during this party?
They were showing us snippets of the shows. They had all the TVs. They had like 1950s style, really old TVs everywhere. And once in a while, they had it set up so the lights would start flashing, like there was some kind of a strange electrical phenomenon going on through the house. And then the TVs would all turn on, and then they would go into a snippet from the show. And it looked very, very good. And they are using the original cases from Project Blue Book.
Some of them look pretty interesting. There's one episode regarding the Lubbock Lights. There's one regarding the Gorman dogfight case, and there's one regarding the Flatwoods Monster. So the ones that I know, they've got a few specific historical cases. I guess it just depends on how they go about handling it. Yeah.
Well, it's a drama based on actual events. So, I mean, I won't be surprised if they show, Dr. Hynek running after an alien with a pistol saying, assume the position, alien scum, I mean, I'm hoping they don't go there, or that they don't make it too corny. But, it is a dramatic series based on real events in actual life. The family they've seen episodes. I guess they've seen the first episode. Paul Hynek was telling me, and they seemed very happy with it. So I think it's going to be a good thing. I think they're going to do it tastefully, and it will be dramatized, but they're going to stick with as close to the facts as they can. Is what I hear. So
yeah, here's a little bit of background on History's upcoming new drama series, so people become a little bit more familiar about what we're talking about. Project Blue Book is based on the true top secret investigations into unidentified flying objects and related phenomena conducted by the U.S. Air Force from 52 to 69, and then just also a little bit of information about Joseph Allen Hynek, who you've been going over. He was an American astronomer and professor, and also, of course, an iconic ufologist. Earl, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background regarding when you were growing up and your mother. I know that there was a article done on you and your mom for UFO Truth magazine, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that.
Sure. My friend and my boss at MUFON, Jeff Krause, who's the Southern California State Director, about 3.5 years ago, or it was actually a little longer than that, maybe 4 years ago, I told him about my mom's story, and he felt that it was certainly worth writing an article about. My mom, back in the 1950s, she worked for Howard Hughes. She was one of Howard Hughes's 2 personal secretaries. He had 2 secretaries. One was my mom. He eventually wound up having an affair with, actually. But anyhow, my mom would go and he would send her out to do his beckoning because, at that point, he was pretty much a shut-in. they would communicate over intercoms over at the Santa Monica office of Hughes Aircraft.
So this is what, 1960s then, basically?
This was in the 1950s. It's
50s,
about 1956, I believe. My mom worked for him for, I think, about 2.5 years. And one of the assignments that he sent my mom out on, he didn't tell my mom anything about it. He sent her in a plane, and my mom told me about this when I was a child. I was probably about 7 years old when I first heard about it, maybe even a little younger. But he sent her out to the Great American Desert, quote unquote. She never told me which desert it was, but anyhow, they got there and they took her in a bus with blacked out windows, did that whole deal, and they delivered her to this little shack. My mom went to the shack, and she had a little security detail with her. And she said that there was a plain old Otis elevator like you'd find in a skyscraper that was in this little, looked like a pump house or something, is the way that she described it. So they took her in there with, the little security detail and my mom. The doors closed, and she felt vertigo as this thing went down. She said that it scared her because, she thought maybe it would go down 1 or 2 stories, but it just kept on traveling deep. She said that when the doors opened up, that there was a little city down there. This was back in the mid-1950s. So you have to wonder what they have now,
Yeah, really.
She said that they got around in little golf carts, that there were many people living down there, that many of them were the German scientists that we had acquired through Project Paperclip. Mm-hmm. My mom, she said that she actually knew Wernher von Braun, that she thought he was a charming man. She really liked him. He called my mom Betty Grace. He kind of put her first name and her middle name together, and my mom really, she thought very highly of him. But as she described the little city under the desert, she said, well, there were cafes there. They had like a cafe with yellow, umbrellas over the tables, which she thought was kind of funny because, you're way under the ground. You don't really need umbrellas, Mm-hmm. There's not much weather down there. Mm-hmm. But that, apparently they were trying to make people feel very at home. They had a movie theater. She said that she even had a guy down there that she could go to have her hair done. Barber shops. She said, yeah. And apparently people lived down there. And so I grew up with that bit of esoteric knowledge. And if my mom was in a good mood or she was comfortable talking, she would give me little bits and pieces of her story. Of course, she had high security clearances, and she was certainly not supposed to tell her little son about her work, or that there was such a thing that we had, this secretive city that was underground. But separate from talking about the underground base, my mom always spoke with great authority about life that was from other planets. She told me that our government knew that we weren't alone, and that she told me once, I took her to see Star Wars when it first came out, the very first one, trying to get her to talk a little bit more. And my mom, after the film, she got kind of excited, and she said, well, son, Star Wars is not all that far-fetched. It's not far-fetched at all. She said, intelligent life in the universe is a very, very real thing. We know about it. And she said, it's real. It's realer than you will probably ever know, my son. And that was my mom. She was a very interesting woman. She knew some very interesting and top secret things. And later on in life, my mom she became a housewife for many years, and she had to go back to work back in the mid-70s. And so she kind of got a little less loquacious about what she had done and what she had said before. So I'd have to kind of work to get information out of her after she'd gone back to work. Because, she started working as a headhunter, a corporate headhunter for Lockheed Skunk Works, for Rocketdyne, for Rockwell, North American Rockwell. She was kind of finding scientists for all of the different major aerospace and military contractors out there. So it would take a little more work to get my mom to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, just to give a little background to our listeners about Operation Paperclip that you mentioned, it was a secret program the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency largely carried out by special agents of the Army, in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, such as Werner von Braun and his V-2 rocket team, were recruited after the end of World War II in Germany and taken to the U.S. for government employment, primarily between 1945 and 1959. And many were former members, and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party, of course. Also wanted to just give a little background on Werner von Braun. He was a German-American aerospace engineer and a space architect. Earl, when you were a kid, you had a natural obsession with the topic of ufology. And is it true that you were building a spaceship, or can you give a little bit of background on that?
Yeah. Well, my knowledge in aerospace was mostly derived from, Felix the Cat cartoons, and the Great Gazoo from the Flintstones and such, the Jetsons, right? But for some reason, and this was even before my mom ever really talked about this stuff, I've always just had a propensity for outer space. I've been in love with it. And I remember I was maybe 4 years old, and my dad had built a wooden swing set in our backyard in Venice, California, where I'd grown up. And there was some leftover lumber. And I had like the little space helmet. I mean, we all had the little ray gun and the space helmet. We're talking, 1960, 61 here. 61, I guess it would have been. So I sort of hammered together what I thought was a good approximation of a spaceship. And I begged my dad to haul that up to the top of the swing set. And he finally did. He finally hauled it up there. And I remember climbing up there, and I guess that I was up there waving at the sky, singing and saying hello. And I remember that my mom, she looks out the window and she says, "Son, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm saying hi to the space people, Mom. I'm saying hello to the space people." And I look back on that with a smile, because honestly, it's full circle. That's what I'm doing, now, today, 60 years, 55 years after that event, I'm looking for and waving to the space people, more or less. So,
Chris Squire was a dear friend of yours, of Yes, who very sadly we lost 3 years ago from leukemia. And my understanding is he loved to talk about UFOs with you. And he did have a sighting of a daylight flying disc while on tour in 1976. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Sure, I can. I'm a musician as well, and at one point I've been a fan of the band Yes, the progressive rock band, since I was a kid. I saw them in concert the first time back in 1974. And I wound up as an administrator on YesFans.com. I was doing this for 10 years. From the early 2000s until about 2010. And during that time, I actually got to know and become really close friends with one of the greatest musicians in the world. I mean, I still think he was the greatest bass player of our time, was Chris Squire of Yes. And the man had a fascination with UFOs. It went back to, as you were saying, Chant, 1976. They were on tour in England. And at this point, the band members, they could all have their own driver and their own little caravan bus. It was sort of like a different little van for each member in the band. So Chris was with his driver, and they're driving to the next stop on their tour. And Chris had to go and relieve himself. Mm-hmm. And so he had his friend pull the bus over, and he was out in this field in the middle of nowhere in Britain, when he was literally hovered over by a flying saucer. And he thought it was kind of, I mean, he found the humor in that he's out, peeing in the field, and then suddenly he sees the most amazing thing he had ever seen in his life. And of course, I asked him, I said, well, were you smoking anything at the time, Chris? And it was like, no. He said, no, we were being good, we would take turns driving with him, and, that was the whole thing. He didn't want to have to travel with the rest of the band. They loved each other, but it was always a love-hate relationship. But, it gets like that when you're in a band sometimes. But he had a very close encounter with a flying disc. He said that it was about maybe 40 feet away from him, about 35 to 40 feet across the disc was, that it had a dome on top, and it looked like it had windows. And that changed the course in his life. He suddenly knew that we weren't alone, that things were not quite the way that they seemed. And so we would talk. We would get together. We would, Chris enjoyed fine wine, and we would sort of sometimes go until 2 a.m. talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
He also, excuse me. He also wrote that song, "Arriving UFO."
I was just about
for
to ask.
Tormata.
I think that one. I think John Anderson might have written that one, but he wrote that about Chris's sighting. That is about Chris. That song.
Okay.
That was John Anderson addressing it in the song. I don't think Chris actually. He might have written the bass part, which was pretty cool. They put it through a bass synthesizer to get some of the sounds that they used.
I'd play it, but we don't have the license to do it. So
yeah,
it's a great song, though.
No, I had one conversation with Chris where we were talking about Jacques Vallée's "Us from the Future" hypothesis, where Jacques Vallée thought that perhaps some UFOs might be time travelers from the future, and that might actually be us, checking in on the past, tourists even maybe, or scientists, historians. And I brought that concept up to Chris, and he was just mind blown about it. He had never heard that one, and Chris was real interested in this stuff. He knew he knew a lot about it, but he had never heard that one. So it was maybe 2 a.m. I'm getting ready to leave. They would rent an apartment out in Hollywood when they were working on records and stuff out here. And this is like 2008. And Chris grabs me as I'm going out the door, and he said, Earl. He has a Post-it pad in his hand and a pen. Repeat for me exactly what you said about the future, us from the... And it's like, okay, hold on, Chris. I said, UFOs may be just us from the future. Aliens might just be us from the future. And he wrote that down on this Post-it pad. He gave me a bear hug. It kind of lifted me off the ground. And Chris wasn't one to give you bear hugs. I think it might have been the only bear hug I ever got from a man. But I left, and I was smiling and then thinking, oh, good old Chris, that was fun, and never thought again about it. The next Yes tour, we went to see the band, I believe it was in San Diego at Humphreys Pavilion, I think it's called. And they played a new song called Aliens Are Only Us from the Future.
That's fantastic. Wow.
And I kind of sat there and my jaw dropped, and I'm thinking, well, there's my 15 minutes of Andy Warhol thing.
Yeah. And they ended up recording that song with Steve Hackett of Genesis.
Yes, he did.
In an album, that they recorded called Squawk It. Is that right?
Squawk It, yeah. Hackett, Squire. It's a beautiful recording. You can find it on YouTube. You just put up Aliens Chris Squire, and it'll pop right up for you.
There we go. Yeah, I'm going to spell it too. SQUACKETT. Earl, you've been deeply embedded in the realm of rock and roll for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. As a kid, I listened to a lot of music all my life. My father is a classical musician. He's a classical vocalist. And, I grew up around Bach, and my dad, switched on Bach, the record by Wendy Carlos that Bob Moog kind of helped him with all the synthesizers and taught him how to use everything, and is just I grew up around a lot of music. My uncle would always slip me the new Beatles record when it would come out. So when I was about 12 years old, I asked for a drum set for Christmas, and I got the acoustic guitar instead. Smart parents. Drums are noisy, you know. Mm-hmm. But I kind of took to it like a fish to water. You know, I taught myself. Later on, I did take lessons from a really great jazz guy. Bob Dorr was his name. But anyhow, I started writing my own songs. When I was in junior high school, I had a very smart English teacher who found, you know, she heard me playing guitar and singing to a couple of friends. And she said, "You wrote that?" I said, "Yeah, I did." She said, "The lyrics too?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You know, I'll give you extra credit in English for if you know, play in front of the class. Just play your own composition. You can do it as many times as you want, you know, and that'll be extra credit for you." And so I started doing that, and it got me so that I started methodically writing, because I had a goal. You know, I wasn't getting paid by a record company, but I was getting, you know, a A+ in English. And maybe I would sort of not do so well on the grammar, you know, test, but I would make up for it by writing a new song. And the teacher she was great, but she would be kind of critical. She would say, "Well, you know, you're writing about girls and you're writing about, you know, cars and this and that, but can you write about, you know, say write something political or write something spiritual?" And so I learned how to write because of this teacher. Mrs. Seal was her name. This is back 1971, 72. So I learned how to play, and I learned how to play in front of people, and I started playing in bands. Towards the end of the 1970s, I got my first professional gig, which was with a black gospel funk band. It was called the Glory Gospel Review. And the way that worked was that our manager was Ike and Tina Turner's old sound man. And he was like, he'd quit working for Ike and Tina because his nose couldn't take it anymore, quote unquote. I don't know if I need to elaborate on that.
Right.
But, yeah, he told a story about how that something was wrong with the soundboard. They sent it to the Fix-It guys, and they sent the soundboard back in a little bag of white powder along with it. They said, "This is why you could move the little pots on the mixing board." Yeah. So he got sick of that kind of lifestyle, and he was a church guy. He went to the Church of God in Christ out in Watts, California, and he had a little recording studio set up right in the church. So he decided, well, what if I put together something like Ike and Tina's, review, but where, there isn't all this white powder and bad stuff going on around it. So I actually got the gig. A couple of the guys heard me, trying out a couple of pedals in the old Guitar Center in Hollywood, and they pulled me aside and they said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody, a rock lead guitar player that can also, play funk stuff. And by the way, do you write your own stuff? It's a review." It's like, yeah, I do. And like a whirlwind, I was invited to the next rehearsal. It was a 17-piece band. They had a horn section. A couple of guys were in Rufus with Shaka Khan. A lot of people had played with Barry White, and just, it was an R&B, just R&B heaven. And I didn't actually have a background in R&B. I quickly acquired one. And so that was kind of the first professional gig I ever had. And we went on to play many, many festivals. We opened up for Al Green and Marvin Gaye. We opened up for Billy Preston at the old Aquarius Theater in Hollywood. We even won the Gone Show. And that's kind of how I got my start in music. Warner Brothers was interested in us, and we actually recorded demos, quote unquote, which could have been an album, but our manager kind of, it was a 17-piece band, and he was trying to make it so that we could all live on our salary, and so, it's going 17 ways. It's not exactly like paying a folk duo or the, 4 guys in a rock band. So I think he held out too long, and they finally became uninterested in us. And so I went on to kind of doing my own shows. I eventually put out 3 different CDs, mostly acoustic stuff, although I still can shred on electric and do for people. And currently, I do studio work for people. I do my own recordings, and it's one of the great passions in my life.
That's great. I wanted to bring up Peter Robbins, your friend and mentor, but I wanted to bring up Bud Hopkins first, a little bit of background on him. Bud Hopkins, the famous ufologist who was also an abstract painter, one of his assistants, or the assistant for him, was Peter Robbins, your friend and mentor. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Peter I met actually through Facebook. Who introduced me to him was my boss at MUFON, was my state director, Jeff Krause. If you're out there, Jeff, hello. There's your shout out for the day. But Jeff, he's who got me to work for MUFON in the first place. And I was really kind of armchair about the phenomenon until I just made the big dive into the pool and decided I want to do this for myself. And one of the first cases I had, it was the first unknown that I ever closed. And it was an abduction case that involved an entire family in the middle of the desert near China Lake. And there was 8 hours of missing time in this case. And I researched it really deeply, and Jeff was very happy with the results. And that was the first case I ever closed as an unknown. Jeff saw that I had a propensity for abduction and visitation cases, the high strangeness stuff. So he wanted me to meet Peter Robbins, as he did work for Bud Hopkins and kind of spearheaded the abduction movement, more or less, the investigation of that. And Bud was one of the first people to really use hypnotic regression, and he did all this with while holding on to scientific principles, which is very important to Jeff and to myself. So Peter is sort of, he was Bud Hopkins' assistant. He sat in on and assisted on many of the regressions. He kind of helped Bud keep all of his paperwork in line, because Bud was notorious for sort of being, he's like me, I'm looking at my office here, and, I've got this case and that case and the other, they're kind of scattered on my desk and, on the edge of the bed in here,
Yeah.
But Peter was more of an organizer. He comes from an artistic background. Peter is an abstract artist as well.
Yeah.
And is one of my dearest and closest friends. I love Peter like I love the man like God. And as far as ufology goes, I can't really speak of anybody more highly than Peter Robbins.
Wanted to ask you, are there any other cases that you wanted to bring up that have been of particular interest to you, that kind of pop out to you more than the others?
Sure.
That are of high strangeness, something that that you really enjoyed investigating? Sure.
I have a couple. I knew I was going to be doing this today, so I brought a couple of these up on my iPad here.
Okay.
Let me see here. I have one here that's pretty interesting, and I think you'll like this one.
Great.
This one, it was a historic case. It had happened a few years ago, back in 1992, actually. But the man that reported this, who I have to keep anonymous because he is a writer and he works out there, and people are scared to have their names attached to this sometimes because there is still a ridicule element out there,
yes,
especially if you see something as strange as this gentleman saw. But I'll just read his original statement from the report he put into MUFON. I was driving home from a date late in mid-August 1992. I lived in Lomita, but it was a beautiful night, so I decided to take the long way home by taking Palos Verdes Drive north, which snakes along the cliffs of Palos Verdes. That's up near San Diego area. After driving through Lunada Bay, I could see in the distance a greenish glow coming from Point Vicente Cove. As I got closer, the greenish bioluminescent glow grew. I finally rounded the corner where the turnout to the cove was, and the glow by then was all-consuming. I pulled the car over in the turnout they have there, half expecting to see a movie being shot. I got out of the car, and as I walked over to the cliff's edge, I noticed 3 people to my left looking down at whatever was in the cove. It was unusual because I saw no other car parked there. It was dark, but I could tell that this was a family of 3, a mom, a dad, and a small boy. The mother had her arm around the child. I continued to the cliff's edge, and I peered over, and directly in the exact middle of the cove, hovering 8 feet above the water, was a classic-shaped saucer domed craft, ringed with green lights, no more than 50 yards from me. It was big. It was at least 40 feet across. It was domed, and it had unreal skin. The closest thing I could compare it to is a slick, oily puddle. The rainbow colors were dull but prismatic and had a swirling motion. It began to hum. As it did begin to hum, the water beneath it began to bubble and steam. I yelled over to the family left of me, but they stood there silently, motionless, mesmerized by what they were seeing, or so I thought. I was beginning to get spooked. I wanted to see the craft submerge or take off, but I was getting an overwhelming feeling of dread. I couldn't believe my luck and or my eyes, seeing this astonishment up so close and personal. I looked over to the family, but they were rounding the corner, heading down the path that led to the water's edge. That was it. I wasn't going to stick around. I got into my car and I took off. This story has been weighing on my shoulders and weighing down my mind very much lately. It's really, really good for me to tell you about this finally. I held on to it for years. Thank you for the catharsis. That was I got that as a case. It came into my email box.
Nice.
Yeah. And many of the things that he talks about, the water bubbling, in the recent Tic Tac UFO encounter with the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, they described the exact same effect when they saw the object go from way high in the sky down to, level with the water, that they could see the water roiling, where the craft was.
It sounds like the Wanakee Reservoir case in New Jersey. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that from 64 in North Jersey, something very similar, hovering right over a reservoir in northern New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really good case. With this case, I only had one witness. So what you do, or what I do when I have a case like this where there's only one witness, I'll grill them on multiple occasions. We generally take 3 months to close any case that we get through MUFON. Sometimes we'll keep them open longer if the evidence keeps coming in. With this one, I kept it open for a little over 3 months because I kept going back and having him retell the story. I'd cold call the guy and have him, and every time it was the same. He would become very emotional. You could tell that he wasn't reading something or making something up. He was describing something that he had witnessed and seen. I was astounded by some of the details, like the surface of the disc being all a swirl with rainbow colors, the prismatic effect. And I've heard that before with other cases, but he described it quite eloquently, I thought. And after interviewing him 4 times in a row, I ran it past my boss, Jeff. I said, I really want to give this one an unknown. Usually we like to have, you want to have more than one witness. But this one, the gentleman was so well-spoken and so knowledgeable. He had no background in UFOs at all. This was one incident. It was something that he had seen. It wasn't like he was running off to Alien Con or, writing stuff about ET on the internet. He is just a normal Joe who had an extraordinary sighting. So that one I did give an unknown classification to, and it's kind of an astounding case. That's one of my favorites, actually.
Yeah, Frank, did you have any questions that you wanted to bring up with Earl?
Well, going back to that case. Now, I've got the 3 drawings that you sent along. Was the drawing with the saucer with the little wing, is that basically the case you just described, or is that a different case?
That's a brand new case.
Okay.
That's the most recent unknown that I've gotten. And I'll tell you, as far as the way that unknowns go, it's my experience that 90 to 95% of the reports I get in can be described as, half of them I know what I'm looking at as soon as I open the report. It's usually a drone. It sometimes we'll get radar kites. They're being carried by a weather balloon. And you hate that, it's like, because that Roswell was blamed on a weather balloon, and that was no weather balloon.
But sometimes they are weather balloons, or some kind of a balloon.
Balloons.
Sometimes they are.
Yeah, sometimes they are. I've had a few weather balloons. I've even seen one myself through a telescope yet. But this one particular case here is my newest unknown. I attacked it from all sides, and actually this is next to this is the most recent unknown, because I closed this on the 4th of January. I'll read you the synopsis of his case.
Okay.
On Sunday, August 9th, 2018 at 2:45. The witness was headed east on the 8 freeway in San Diego when he noticed a large white glowing football-shaped object with a tall black fin. It was hovering in the sky at around 25,000 feet. The object was standing still with no observable means of support, no wings, no rotors. The witness states that the object suddenly made a 45-degree dive of 15,000 to 20,000 feet, all the while remaining horizontally level. The witness states that this all took place in less than a second, in the blink of an eye. The object then slowly cruised at a 5,000-foot altitude. The witness watched the object slowly fly silently towards the south until he lost sight of it, past where the witness believes that the Mexican border lies. Now, the background on this witness, and I checked his background out, and it was impeccable. The witness has been an aerospace engineer for over 40 years. He does laser calibration of Rolls-Royce and Boeing jet engines. And I did see his work badges, and I had proof that this is who he is and what he does. He's a bit of a plane spotter in his spare time. He loves vintage planes. He's always looking up, and he was not a UFO guy. He told me, I'm going to find. Here's a little bit of the interview that I did with him. He said. He said it appeared to be 4 times the size of a 737 jet.
Wow.
And again, this happened in the San Diego area. This he observed near the same area that the Tic Tac UFO was observed. And the Tic Tac, the New York Times decided that was, worthy of a major story last year.
Sure.
Right.
He said that. I know my airplanes and jets, and this was no airplane or jet. If a jet moved that fast, it would be nosediving. It would be going into a crash. This thing remained horizontal like it had a gyroscope system that was, out of this world. It dropped a good 15,000 to 20,000 feet in less than a second. Then it just hovered there, going slowly towards Mexico. I called the local airports. They couldn't tell me what it was. I checked the local papers, even called the local news channel. Nobody else saw this thing, which is unimaginable to me, but there it is. He said, I never had even the remotest of interests in UFOs. Before my sighting, I thought UFOs were a load of hooey. That was his exact quote, you know.
Okay.
He's an older gentleman. He said, a load of hooey, that it was all a made-up thing. But seeing is believing. So I have had to change my philosophy about mankind's place in the universe as an old man. Anyhow, we talked about how this thing actually kind of defied the principles of thermodynamics as we know them, especially if there was a passenger inside of this craft. And it was a large craft. It doesn't sound like a drone to me. You don't build something, 4 times the size of a 737 unless you have a crew of some sort. But he watched this. It had this weird vertical fin. And if there had been anybody in there and they didn't have some sort of way of balancing out the gravity, the inertia, and that sudden stop that it made. And he said that it stopped gently. It wasn't jarring. That was the weird thing, that you see something travel, 20,000 feet in the blink of an eye. If there was a person in there, there would just be splinters of bones and stuff,
Right.
But he watched it turn on its axis, like it leveled out. The nose never came down. It turned on its axis, and then it started traveling about the speed of a normal aircraft until he lost sight of it, heading out towards, past Catalina Island, off into the Baja Peninsula area that's beyond San Diego there. That was the most recent case that I closed as an unknown. I thought it was a really good case. Bruce Maccabee, the famous ufologist who worked on many, many cases, like the McMinnville case. He was one of the first guys to go in there and use a scientific method and photo analysis on the McMinnville case. And he actually pitched in when I shared this on Facebook a couple days ago. And he said that it reminded him of a sighting back in 1949 called the Rogue River UFO, which I thought was really cool. And he was correct. I mean, they were similar, except the Rogue River UFO didn't do that 20,000 foot sudden drop,
Right.
Keeping perfectly level while it did it. So,
Yeah, I did have a question regarding something you brought up about the Tic Tac UFO. The Defense Department budget, which spent $22 million in secret on the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. You brought that up, Earl, when I asked you the question in our last interview, will disclosure happen? And if so, when and how? And you went on to talk about how there was a disturbing aspect to you. There's no bottom line for reality. There's no trust in the news media. Could you explain a little bit more about how you feel disclosure will happen, if it will, and if so, when and how?
We're doing it. We're doing it right now. This is disclosure. I mean, this is how it happens. You recently interviewed Jan Harzan, and he was saying the same thing, that more or less, I agree. I agree with Jan that disclosure happened when the New York Times put up the article about the Tic Tac video. The USS Nimitz affair. It was, there were no eye rolls, even on the news. I mean, in the past, if they would bring up a UFO story, even something like the Phoenix Lights that were seen by thousands of people, you would still, they'd play the X-Files music. There would be kind of a, half grin going on with the news announcers. There was none of that with the USS Nimitz report. But the story just kind of died out there. People, their reaction was either, oh, well, we already knew that, so what?
Yeah.
Or else it was kind of like, well, you can't trust anything in the news now. And I think that, unfortunately, the whole idea of fake news, that on one hand, perhaps it's made the powers that be comfortable enough to where they are willing to let some of this stuff out. They're not going out and sending debunkers to smash it into, swamp gas or weather balloons now. But I think that society in general, that there's no baseline reality that people look up to, that unfortunately there isn't as much trust in the news services as there used to be. And I don't think that anything has changed with the news services. I think it's just changed with people's attitudes. People, are more apt to read, about conspiracy theories and things, and it's kind of ruined the baseline reality to the point where the New York Times can present a story like this, saying, "Hey, this wasn't any technology that we have. This was not man-made." Again, it was defying, Newton's laws of thermodynamics and doing astounding things. And you can look at it. I mean, it wasn't like it's something that we could even protect ourselves from.
Right.
There was, they scrambled jets out, but they just kind of observed. There was nothing that they could really do. Again, the Tic Tac UFO, and apparently there were a few of them.
Yes,
I think there were like 5 of them altogether. Christopher Day has talked about, Christopher, can't think of his name.
You mean Mellon?
No, it was the Strike Force commander. But I spoke with Chris a little bit about it, and he was there looking at the radar screen, and his guys, they were the guys that he sent up, to intercept. And he said,
"You mean Chris Hayden? Is that who? Or I'm just trying to find out who you could be talking."
I'll have it for you in 1 second. But anyhow, the things that were kind of described in the Tic Tac video were I thought just astounding. They weren't something that we could do. Mm-hmm. And yet there it was. It was a New York Times, major story,
right?
And it just kind of died with a whimper as far as the public goes. But I think that the way that disclosure, going back to disclosure, I think that the guy's name is Kevin Day. That's
Kevin Day. He's going to be on our show in a couple of weeks.
There you go. Kevin's great, and he's. I think that he's right on. I think that he's not fabricating anything.
No. Well, he's the radar operator. He was the radar operator on the Princeton, and radar is physical evidence, and basically backed up what the pilots said that they were seeing. So how much more do you need?
I have a friend on Facebook by the name of Christopher Day. Hi, Chris. You're listening to this. So kind of brain fart going on there. But yeah, it was Kevin Day, and that's the gentleman that I did have speak with a bit. And and then now that there have been debunkers that have been popping up, and people have had valid questions, but I think that so far the questions have been pretty well answered. Jan Harzan seems to think that this is a very, very real occurrence that happened. And this is the way disclosure apparently happens. I think that maybe the way that the public treats the news now, that maybe this is how they can do it, because there's what do you call that? There's an element of deniability, reasonable deniability, that's there with a story, where it's kind of like, well, this is what happened, this is what we saw, this is what the facts are. It's up to you to, there you go.
Well, Jan is a real big To the Stars Academy fan.
Yeah,
that was pretty clear when we spoke to him last week. What do you think about what those guys are up to?
There isn't really peer review in ufology except for the other organizations that are doing the same thing that we are doing. And so that's a form of peer review. So I'm all for it. I think it's really, really good. The more people that are poking around in this, the better it is. It's like the old parable of the monks and the elephant, and the blind monks and the elephant, and everybody's describing a different part of the same thing. You gather all those monks together and you have them all tell your story, and yes, you have a full elephant. But if you just grab one of them, you've got the tail or the foot or the trunk. So we need other people doing this, using different methodologies. I do know that To the Stars, that they're doing more with looking into the metals and trace elements that have been left in certain sightings, and I think they even have gotten some crash retrieval materials, which is amazing.
Metamaterials. Wanted to mention something Frank and I went over in one of his shows, and that was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which is what we're talking about a little bit here, which began in 2007 as a top secret program, and parts of it still remain classified, which I don't know why, because if disclosure is happening, apparently people don't care if it's classified or not. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody seems to notice anything. The New York Times article came out on December 16th of last year on a Saturday morning when nobody would notice anything. And I wonder, even if it were on a weekday, anybody really would have noticed that article.
That's an inconvenient truth.
Yeah, and I think it was just planned to come out on a Saturday morning, is really what I mentioned on Frank's show. Frank, did you have any comments to make about that?
Yeah, just, the stories that have come out, in the mainstream, for us, it's like an avalanche of information because we're all into it. But in the total scheme of things, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to what the media puts out. They're rolling 24/7 with their news channels. They've got their evening news they got to run every day. They've got their papers that they have to print and their websites they have to update. It's just a very small piece of the puzzle in the total news scheme. For us, though, it's make hay while the sun is shining. But for regular folks, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, and you hear a lot of talk about this out there, but I think that it's valid talk. That I think that disclosure, that they've been slowly handing it to us, but that they want us to also be a little confused about it. They certainly haven't given us the whole story, and I don't even know if anybody in the government has the full story, because they like to compartmentalize. But the ATIP program, it was official. We know that they were doing that. Harry Reid has spoken about it. John Podesta, of course, has spoken about it. And 22 million. I've talked with one friend of mine who has a podcast, and he's saying, "Well, that's such a drop in the bucket. It's like a nothing."
Yeah, spread out over 5 years. It's not much at all.
Yeah, but then again, from what I'm seeing, I think that was just one little wing of this. I think that probably the Nimitz affair was a good that was one of the reasons why they even began the study. I think that a lot of the funds, a lot of what they were doing was aimed at that one particular case. Speaking with Jan about this, and he's spoken with a lot of the players that are involved, he was saying that the program is still going on. They just changed the name of it. And apparently there's you can put FOIA requests in for certain things, but there's a security level that is above FOIA. So you can use the Freedom of Information Act as much as you want, but they'll change the name around. They're very tricky about it. They're going to let the public have what they think the public is ready for. The rest, they sit on. They've been doing that for a while. But, popular culture, you look at a show like Project Blue Book. Why is it that is coming out right now? Why is it? The interest level is sort of off. It's just off the hinge. And the public, I think Ancient Aliens and things like that have really brought up a lot of interest in the general public. And so they sort of keep giving us little dribs and drabs, whether through pop culture or New York Times articles on Saturday mornings.
Well, I'll tell you why I think that Ancient Alien shows has really stood the test of time. It's been running a dozen plus seasons already. Is those guys are enthusiastic about their topic.
Sure.
And that goes a long way. I know you were at AlienCon. I don't know if you got to have any contact with some of the top players on that show, but those guys are really into it. Yeah, this episode or that episode, this point or that point, you can sort of tech it and criticize some of the material that they go with. But you can't fake the enthusiasm they have for their subject, and they've got it. And that's what a lot of UFO shows don't do. They take that X-Files sort of atmosphere and make it very dark and make it very conspiratorial. And I think it's exciting myself. So it doesn't surprise me that those shows, sometimes they're just one and done. And we'll see how this Blue Book show goes. And I guess To the Stars Academy is also going to have their show running. And we'll see how it does. I don't think it's a guarantee that it's going to be successful. We'll see if it captures people's imaginations and if it holds it.
Yeah,
I think it will. Yeah. I think it will. I mean, it's a new day, You have all these shows going on about the subject. And I've met Giorgio. I talked with him a bit in the green room at Alien Con, and he's the real deal. It was the first time I've met him, and I really liked him. And he does have the enthusiasm for this. He definitely does. I mean, his show is, what season is this of the show now? I mean,
12 or 13, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many pyramids, so, he has to kind of work a little harder. And some of the episodes, I'm not going to say they're completely silly, but some of, I mean, you have to do so many episodes in a season, and you're on your 13th season of a show. It's going to get a little rough unless a new pyramid, falls out of the sky or something. But Giorgio's heart is in the right place, and he's definitely, he's propagated the idea out into the general public to where, you go into a room or the office or a party, and you go, I'm not saying it was aliens, when the Xerox machine dies, and everybody will laugh. They know the meme, and that's saying something. So.
Frank brought up something interesting. He said that you went to Alien Con. We all want to hear about the latest places you went to regarding, Alien Con.
Yeah, you get around, Earl. Yeah. You get to these fancy parties in Hollywood, and get to go to Alien Con. Tell us a little bit more about that. You had to cross the continent to get there. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's, that's one of the perks of being a MUFON field investigator. If you become a MUFON field investigator, you got to go to Hollywood permit. No, I'm just kidding. I think that it's the proximity to Hollywood, and, I'm just lucky enough, blessed to be living in Los Angeles. I'm here, I can go to the MUFON office and if I want to look through some papers or want to look at the, Leonard Stringfield files or something, well, that's where they are. And, and I do, seeing that I'm chief investigator and assistant state director of MUFON, I am in the loop, and I do get invited to the VIP parties and stuff. And I never guessed that would have ever happened. I mean, when my wife works at Warner Brothers, and she works in the tower over there and in the royalties department. And, it used to be that my wife was the one that would get us to, a screening of the new Lord of the Rings movie or whatever. And when I became a UFO researcher, my wife kind of rolled her eyes a little bit. It's like, oh boy, what's this going to hold, And she's kind of surprised and happy because now I seem to be the guy that's getting the parties and the premieres. So
yeah, you get to know some really fascinating people. Like, well, for example, you and Jan are good friends, but you both went to the Alien Con together. I'm sure you've gone a few times to different places like that with him. But then there's also, isn't there Denise Marcel? Didn't she go to the premiere and you saw her there? Denise Marcel is Jesse Marcel's daughter. And Jesse Marcel, of course, he was involved in regarding the Roswell crash, which actually happened in Corona, New Mexico. Can you give us a little bit more background on that?
Sure. Denise Marcel is a dear friend, as is her husband, Jim. And we I don't know if I should disclose this, but we're all kind of deadheads. We're fans of the Grateful Dead. So we do, we go to see the, Dead and Company shows together and probably have too much fun. But But Jesse Marcel was, of course, a hero of mine, and that he was one of the first guys to stand up and disclose that, no, the government knows that this is a real thing and it was not a weather balloon. And that was the grandfather. And the son came out who, Jesse Marcel, who is the first junior, who's Denise's father. And he was there when Dad came home with the trunk filled with memory metal and I-beams from a UFO. I-beams with strange hieroglyphics on them. And the memory metal, you could shoot a bullet at it and it wouldn't make a dent. But you crumple it up and it stays crumpled for a second and it goes right back to its original shape, like it's electrostatically set that way. And he saw this as a child, and it made a great impression on him. Of course, that was what his father was hoping. It's like, this is something from another world. I want my family to see it. So Denise grew up with that bit of knowledge, just sort of like I grew up with knowing, what my mom had told me. And, I once saw somebody go after Denise and her brother, Jesse III, about their grandfather, and Jesse Marcel III was very eloquent in that he said, well, my grandfather was the head of security at Roswell. That was where they sent the Enola Gay from. They dropped the first atomic bomb from that airfield, and he was head of security. They saw weather balloons all the time. Mogul balloons, whatever you want to call it. My grandfather knew about all that, and he knew his spaceships from his balloons, for God's sake. And then he went on to say that his father, that Denise's father, Jesse Jr., he was a surgeon. The Army recalled him to go to Iraq, or I think it was the Air Force, maybe, to go back to do field surgery, helping people that have been hurt, with IEDs and stuff over there. Man was a great American hero. He should be in the history books, is where he should be. To me, the grandfather, Jesse Marcel I, should be right next to Neil Armstrong and John Glenn. It was the first person that ever disclosed to us that, we are unequivocally not alone, and something from another planet is it crash landed in the middle of a desert, and he saw the debris field.
At the time, that story did get out, but then it went away.
Just went repressed.
Away. Yeah, I wanted to bring up something interesting you brought up, and that was the memory metal that Jesse Marcel was talking about. And that is, I interviewed Dr. Irena Scott recently, and she said this about UFO crashes. She said, this is contradicted by the accounts that their substance, such as memory metal, is indestructible. This makes it difficult to view a crash as real. A French ufologist, Jean Sider, and I published several articles in the MUFON journal, that such crashes might be set up by the UFO phenomena to influence our culture or perception of the subject. It's interesting, the memory metal, and it's being indestructible, that kind of indestructible nature. And then she brings up a very good point that if a UFO crashes, how did it crash if it's indestructible? Do you have any comments to make about that?
I think about that a lot.
Yeah. So good point.
I don't know if all crashes have been purposeful, because, apparently, J. Edgar Hoover talked about, materials that we, possibly had retrieved from the battle in L.A. back in 1942, and that is before Roswell. But I think that the idea of the Trojan horse method of giving us technology, letting us know that they're here, is probably what's going on there. That it was some of these crashes are probably purposeful. Now, I've had people say, well, but there were beams, apparently. There were like 4 or 5 beams that they found in the Corona crash site. But I do believe that perhaps one of the technologies that our visitors have is sort of like in the film Avatar or even Blade Runner, where they can create clones, replicates, and maybe it's like an avatar where the intelligence can use this life form as a spacesuit, more or less. And so, if it crashes and this spacesuit, this biological robot is lost, it's not the end of the world. It was meant to do that, and it doesn't mean that the intelligence that was actually piloting the body of this being is even harmed, and that, I know that's really esoteric and kind of out there, but we've seen a lot of instances where I think that kind of holds up. One of the rumors that are out there that you hear over and over again are that when they have actually done retrievals and they've gotten bodies and they've done autopsies on these, that there was no alimentary canal, that there was that it was very, very basic organs that were in these bodies, and it wasn't the sign of something that had highly evolved biologically, that it looks more like perhaps it's a biological construct or a robot. So I think that if you look at it that way, even if you had pilots, this is a way for them to get the biology out there. It's a way for them to get us to understand crazy ideas like, we just created this life form for this purpose. Life form was meant to crash in the desert. And it's a way to get the technology to us, and it's a little bit of disclosure for the rest of us, but it's also disclosure for the people in the government and in science who actually are taking these, retrieving these items and these beings and trying to piece it all together.
Yeah.
If you handed Leonardo da Vinci an iPhone or an electric guitar, you could hand him a stopwatch. He might be able to figure out the stopwatch, okay? But it's going to be this technology that's above him. It's going to seem like it's magic to him at first, or witchcraft, but he would just be seeing a little bit of futuristic technology that was above, his time period. And I think that perhaps that this is kind of what we are getting, that we're being given little gifts, little nudges. You look at Philip Corso and the day after Roswell. That book, is very influential for me because some of the things he described were exact to what my mom had described to me. But he said that, they would get these technologies and he would send them out to different companies like Battelle and elsewhere. And that they would say, well, we got this from Japan, or we got this from the Soviets. They would lie, more or less, and they would say, just don't worry about where it came from, just figure it out. And maybe our visitors are doing this on purpose. They're trying to get us to go in a certain direction. I imagine they're trying to get us to evolve spiritually and in our personalities, in a certain direction as well. As Jan said in his interview, the whole Robert Salas thing that happened out in Montana with a nuclear base, where they actually shut down the nuclear missiles.
Yes,
that's very, very telling and speaks volumes. I don't think that it's a malevolent. I don't think that this is malevolence that is visiting us. I think that they have, our future and our own evolution in mind, and that they're letting us know what we should look at, what we should be careful about, what we should study, what direction we should go with technology, and they're just kind of doing a soft disclosure to our own government. They're doing it. And then our government turns, they're doing soft disclosure to us. But I think that is happening on two different levels. And maybe trickle-down theory, it maybe doesn't work so well in finances, but perhaps it does work well as far as getting technology and evolution going on in a certain direction for our intelligence, for the human.
And just to jump in really quick, we do have memory metal. They developed something called nitinol in the early 60s, which needs a catalyst. It doesn't go back to its original shape on its own. You've got to heat it or cool it or whatever the case may be. But shape memory alloys do exist. We've got them.
Yeah, we
That's
do.
Fascinating.
We do. Some say, I think Irina is who I was talking with, Dr. Irina. I was so happy that you did an interview with her, by the way, Chant. She's a hero wonderful to me. And, she's a classic ufologist. And I just have so much respect for her. But
her books are great, too.
Yeah, yes, they are.
Yeah. Her new book, Sacred Corridors, I'm reading right now. And she actually mentions my mom's case in there, which I was just really gobsmacked and thrilled to see that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Meant a lot to me.
Right. Yeah, it's called Sacred Corridors, Secrets Behind the Real Project, Blue Book, Wright-Patterson, Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle, Memory Metal, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and UFO Cover-Ups, which is, it came out January 1st. Yeah. And I just wanted to just let the listeners know a little bit of background about her. That way they know they're more familiar with her. She's the great-great-grandniece of John Purdue. She has a PhD in physiology from the University of Missouri. She was an assistant professor of biology at St. Bonaventure University. She's published works in biology and about Ohio history, and she was also on the MUFON board of directors in the 1990s to 2000s, and she's an investigator and consultant and was an investigator for UFOs.
And more important than all that, she did an interview on my show back in the spring.
That's right. That's correct.
Frank had the privilege of interviewing her. I just want to bring up something random. When we were talking before we came on the show today, Frank brought up something really interesting, and he was talking to you about SpaceX and how Elon Musk, when he has his rockets go off, that you guys might get some reports about that. Is that true?
My dear friend, in quotation marks, my dear brother Jeff, he'll send a big bunch of them to me, and you more or less you have to, write the people that submitted and say, yes, I saw that too, and that was actually SpaceX, Elon Musk doing his thing. So every time we have a launch from Vandenberg, we get all sometimes we'll get 20 reports in on it. And I'll get like a good 7 or 8 of them myself. You have to do the paperwork, So it's whenever it happens, it's kind of like, well, this is part of the job, and yay, Elon Musk. I'm all for what he's doing, but you kind of have to tell the people, yes, this is what you saw, and then I have to, I still have to fill out paperwork. Good old Form 30. Anybody that is a field investigator for MUFON will know about Form 30. And you just have to kind of tick everything off, find the coordinates for Vandenberg. It's the but that's a part of it. I mean that's part of what we do is inform the public of what they saw. Everything that you see that looks strange is not a UFO.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah, it could be a drone. So are there very many drone reports, that you get, where you realize they really are drones, things like that nature?
I feel so terrible about it. I gave my grandson a drone for Christmas this year, They're everywhere. I had one guy who kept seeing a UFO. He put in a report. This is about 2.5 years ago. He put in a report. He's describing it to me. He had a little bit of video footage, and I said, that's a personal radio-controlled drone, dude. That's what you were seeing. He said, no, it's not. It's a flying saucer. I'm going, well, I'll look into it a little bit more, but that really looks like a drone on flash mode. So the guy called me up like 3 other times. And it's like, it's back. It's back. It's like, take some video, and it's a drone. Finally, like the 4th phone call I got from him, and he was a really nice gentleman. I mean, we want people to give us reports. I do not want this story to stop anybody from putting in a report, please. because it might have been a flying saucer. But I finally told him, you know what? Because he was running after it, I said, go ahead. And you're not supposed to say that. You don't want to tell people to go and pull a Travis Walton and run towards a UFO. No, and I'll tell people, no, you never run after a UFO. But I was so sure of what he was seeing, and I saw the video. I said, just, okay, go ahead. And he ran down the block, and he ran down another block, and he got in the middle of a field, and he has me on the phone the whole time, and he goes, and there it is. It's a guy and his kid playing with the drone. You're right.
I saw my first drone a few weeks back driving home from work, and they do get your attention. I'll tell you that. I saw it initially. It looked like it was just hovering and had these green sort of LED type lights on it. And it was very impressive. Okay, well, I'm driving, and I had to lose sight of it for a little bit. But then as I got back into a position where I could see it again, it was doing all these kind of wild maneuvers. It was very impressive. They do get your attention. There's no doubt about it.
Well, we see a lot of them, and they're cool. And I haven't bought one for myself yet. And it's just like the bane of ufology right now is probably 30% of the reports I get in are drone reports. Another maybe 10% are Chinese lanterns.
Yep.
But you get so that you can recognize even in the narrative description what the person was seeing. And so I'll kind of tick those off one by one, and it's like right now is no different from usual. I have about 30 cases that I'm currently working on. That doesn't include the cases I'm getting from the experiencer research team at MUFON. That's a whole other ball of wax.
Are you into that?
Yes.
Is that okay?
I'm part of Kathleen Marden's team. Kathleen Marden is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. She's had an experience of her own, and a few years back, she and Dr. George Medic began the MUFON's experiencer research team. They came up with a group of 20 questions. You can find it on MUFON.com. It's experiencer questionnaire. And the local ones that come in out my direction, which includes all of California. Sometimes I'll even get Arizona and Texas, because we get a lot of those in. But I get those. And the way that we approach those, it's very different from how we approach the CMS cases. The CMS cases, that's, the computer management system that's more or less based on Hynek's precepts, and that those are the cases where I'm trying to prove that this was or was not a UFO. We use a scientific method and deduction and research and evidence, and we're looking for evidence for those. With the ERT group, it's different. It's more a place where a person who has had an abduction or a series of abductions or visits, alien contact can go and speak safely with somebody who's not judgmental and tell their story. And I'll take notes. We have certain markers that we've got like 60, 70 different markers and more from I think that so far, the cases that we've had.
Well, what do you mean by markers?
Thousands.
What do you mean by that?
Certain things that you see pop up in different cases that we recognize. Certain symbols on uniforms of beings, or even like symbols that people will see in the craft that they are taken to. The way that they are either taken or visited, sounds they hear, smells that they smell, the types of beings that they see. It all kind of, we find certain things that are repeating markers. And you use this, I'm a nurse in real life too. We don't talk about that, but I am a licensed working nurse. And we do the same thing with nursing. You look for certain symptoms, certain things that are in common with a condition and through that you can help your patient, or you can know that the person needs this medication or that. And it's the same thing. These markers will pop up over and over again. So we listen to these people's stories. We write down what markers they have in common with past cases. And the cases go into the many thousands now that we have had over the last three and a half years, I think it's been going on.
Now, are you limited just to California, or this is a nationwide effort, or because that's a lot of people in California?
Yes.
Okay.
We get more cases in California than anywhere else. That's,
wow.
So I'm very busy with that. It's different because I'm mostly listening to these stories. I'm taking notes. If they need a support group, I'll send them to the support group, the support groups that I know of. If they want to be hypnotically regressed, I have hypnotists. I have a list of people that are certified and licensed and that we like to work with. Some of them go to Yvonne Smith out here, who has an office in La Crescenta and also works up in the San Diego area, Orange County, a lot. And she gets a lot of the people that want to be regressed. And I really love what I'm doing with that. I get a lot of classic cases where, the proverbial grays coming through a portal in the wall or bringing you through the ceiling. Sometimes things go wrong. I had a guy who is bruised head to toe because the ceiling didn't go malleable quick enough. So
oh my gosh.
The guy, and this guy was a big guy. He's like a big, kind of quiet, but a bouncer. You get. I get cases from scientists, from seismologists, and bouncers, apparently, And so this guy, he had been abducted before, and he heard the little buzz going on, and he's like, oh no, it's them again. He suddenly can't move. They start levitating him from his bed, and the ceiling was not malleable, and he slammed into the ceiling. It was like a Roadrunner cartoon.
Wow.
But, we get cases of all different sorts. I had a really interesting one. This was just last night. I had a witness who, her whole family, they're up in the Northern California area. And I can't tell you too much because we're careful about the ERT cases. They're pretty much, we literally have to lock the paperwork up after we've gone through these cases. But it was a very unusual one because it wasn't your proverbial beings. This woman is seeing globes of light. Sometimes her car has been followed and tracked by 15, 20 like golf ball sized orbs, almost like, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the old Foo Fighter cases from World War II, where the planes, B-17s would be tracked by these balls of light. And we called them a German secret weapon, and the Germans called it an American secret weapon because we were all experiencing this. Anybody up in the sky. My dad was a tail gunner in a B-17, and he talked about it. My dad didn't love the idea of UFOs. He was a religious man, so he thought it was some form of ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire. But even he admitted, well, no, they would kind of follow us. It was kind of scary. We thought it was the Germans spying on us. But this woman, this is happening contemporaneously. It's happening right now. She had an incident just a couple days ago where these balls of light seem to track the family. They track her. And she believes that they're beings in themselves, that they're not vehicles. She talked about one point where the kids were all in the car and they're seeing these, and they said, look, it's fairies. Like Tinkerbell, they thought that they were being followed by fairies. One time she and the kids were all out in the backyard and they started seeing these orbs of light. And this stuff called angel hair started falling from the sky. Angel hair has been seen in other UFO sightings. There's been times where it's just this very gossamer like thin thread that will fall, It's almost like spider webs, and some people blame it on spiders. There are spiders that do send their seeds out this way, but it's like a mating sort of thing. But when it's all at once and it's all encompassing, and when it's around a UFO sighting, well, we think that that's something different and that's something else. So she had that story about the angel hair falling around her family. Her kids are picking it up. And she's saying, you shouldn't touch that. We don't know what it is. But for her, this has all been like this ongoing experience. She hasn't been abducted. She hasn't seen little gray guys coming through her wall. She hasn't been taken up to a ship. But she's had this ongoing experience. And I found it really interesting. Very eloquent woman. Soft-spoken, her vocabulary was just really, really strong, and her family, that her kids and her grandchildren were there when I was talking with her, and they all say that this is true, that they've seen this. And that was the most recent. The most recent experience or research team case that I was working on. And this person that I was speaking with, she said, actually, I don't mind if you ever talk about this. And so I'm being a little more open about sharing this story with you guys. She actually, I actually recorded her giving the narrative of what she's been experiencing, and she did say that was okay. So, I usually, the cases I get through the EMT run the gamut. I've got the cases where the person sees the beings and they go to the ship, they're taken, they're paralyzed. But then this one was a very unordinary case. I wasn't even sure if it was proper for the, experience or research team to be the ones investigating it at first. But the more I looked at it, it's like, well, these aren't vehicles. It's a different kind of being. And some people speak of ascended beings as appearing, as globes of light. And for this family, it's enhanced their life. They're happy that it's there. She said, I would never want it to stop. It's like this little bit of magic in my life.
That's a fascinating case. Earl, I wanted to ask you just two last things. And one is, I wanted to know if you could just mention a little bit about Leonard Stringfield, who apparently was very influential regarding your having read up on him when you wanted to get involved in the topic of ufology. And then my last question to you is if you would mention just a few things that represent how you feel about the topic of ufology.
Sure, Chant. Leonard Stringfield, he was kind of doing what I am doing, but he was doing this back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. I believe he passed away 1993 or so. And Dr. Irina had met with Leonard a few times. She knew Leonard Stringfield, but he worked with Hynek. He was one of those classic ufologists who his gist and MO was studying crash retrievals, UFO crash retrievals. He was the first guy to kind of bring out Jesse Marcel. He heard about Jesse Marcel, another ham radio operator who knew Jesse Sr. got a hold of him and said, "Hey, have you ever heard about this guy?" And he hadn't. And so Leonard was one of the first. In fact, he was the first person to go and investigate the Roswell crash. In doing what he did, he found that there were many crashes. Some were, that the government even acknowledged. I mean, we know through FOIA requests that yes, this is true, that there have been crashes, and that we have figured out ways to send teams out to gather the materials, keep the people away from the site, try to retrieve the technology without causing a national panic. Now, MUFON, we are lucky enough to have inherited his complete series of notebooks. So they have all of the notebooks. The secretary that worked for him, she kept a copy of his personal notebook. So apparently the family of Leonard Stringfield has the originals, but we have the copies of all of those notebooks. And they're all, they're done really beautifully. Each one is in its own little binder. And I've had a chance to look through those, and it's very, very fascinating. One of my greatest heroes in ufology. I mean, the guy had cojones. We're talking, he was going out to sites where there had been crashes. He was talking to the witnesses. Now you can find his status reports. They're on Amazon. You can actually buy those still. They've published them. He did write one book called Situation Red, which is just an amazing book on ufology that's still in print. And yeah, he's one of my greatest heroes. That's kind of it.
Great. And then if you have a few things to say that represent how you feel about the topic of ufology, what would it be?
The most important thing that's happening on our planet, in my opinion, is that we are being visited by either extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or both, but that there is a non-human intelligence that is at work and that's communicating with humans and sometimes visiting us and even sometimes taking us. And ufology is a strange science. You can't get a degree in it yet. Maybe someday you will be able to. Scientists have gone into this, like, Stanton Friedman or J. Allen Hynek. Dr. Irina Scott, is a bona fide scientist, and she's a true ufologist. But the beauty of the field is that a layman like myself, where I'm really well read and I understand my sciences, but I don't have a degree in these things, that you can go in there and that you can make a difference as far as learning about the phenomenon, gathering evidence, actually closing cases, and doing what we're doing right now, going in the public eye and saying this is the most important thing that's happening on our planet right now, that we are not alone, we're being visited, and we're being communicated with. And what does this mean to humanity? And to me, ufology is a blessing in my life. I got into this later on. I was about 55 years old when I decided to throw myself at the phenomenon. Some of it is that I'm still looking for my mom. My mom only told me so much about what she was doing, and she said, "Well, it's very real phenomenon, Earl, probably realer than you will ever know." And part of this is I'm kind of trying to disprove that, it's realer than you will ever know part of that sentence. I want to know. And through diligence and a lot of hard work and sometimes luck or synchronicity, I've been able to find some really impressive UFOs. And I've gathered the evidence, and I've met the real heavy requirements that are due there in order to be able to call something an actual unidentified, flying object or unidentified aerial vehicle. And you can do this too out there in YouTube land.
Yeah, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
And if you would like to do this, the way to do it is the way that I did it. Mm-hmm. Go to MUFON.com.
Yes.
Click on the link, How to Become a Field Investigator. You take a test. You'll get a workbook, and it's a lot of reading, but I did it in about a week or so. I had a week off, and I treated it like a job. I applied myself to it, and I did ace the test. I met my local state director on MUFON. You can also find that in the directory, which is available to everybody at MUFON.com. And the last coming up on 4 years of my life, have just been astounding. And I've been able to do the same thing as Hynek or Stringfield. And I don't have a degree. I don't have a PhD like Dr. Irena Scott has. But don't ever let that hold you back. You can do this yourself if you have the love for it and the desire. And that's my thoughts on ufology in the future, that it's people like you out there and myself that are going to set the pace and are going to bring the evidence in that is going to open the world up to the greatest fact that there is, that we are not alone.
We are not alone. I agree with you. And I want everybody to have the opportunity to read a little bit more about you. And that interview I did with you recently it's been published at wordpress.com. So how people can get to it is they can go to chanthannah.wordpress.com and look through the blog area. And they'll see the interview with Earl Gray, the chief investigator for the Southern California chapter of MUFON. It's been a real joy having you on today. We really have enjoyed listening to you share your stories and a little bit about yourself. It's been an honor and privilege having you on the show today. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you, Chant. A great privilege and honor for me, too. And thank you, Frank. You guys
absolutely. It was a blast. Day. Thanks for coming on, Earl. I appreciate it. All right. So that went beautifully. Chant, you want to go over the schedule for the rest of the week?
Sure. Yeah. So does this mean that Earl's off Skype with us?
I don't know if he's hung up yet or not, but before we go...
I'm listening to you guys.
Yeah, before we go, we've got shows coming up this week. Yeah. We've got a busy schedule. I happen to be off for the week of work, so I've got some time to put these together and get them streamed up there. Chant, you've got Gary Hesseltine tomorrow talking about his new documentary, Capel Green, on the Rendlesham case. We've got Tim Beckley coming up on Tuesday.
Cool.
Giuliano.
Cool.
Yeah, Tim's awesome. I did his show a few years back. He's a cool guy. We'll talk a little bit about Muhammad Ali and UFOs and all kinds of stuff. Giuliano Marinkovic from Omni Talk Radio is going to be on Thursday. Mike Panicello, who's the MUFON director in Connecticut, is going to be on Friday. And we've got a couple shows coming up. On the 20th, we're going to have a Nimitz Super Show with Kevin Day and Dave Beatty, who made the Nimitz Encounters movie. And we might have some additional guests on that. We're going to talk all about that Nimitz case. And then on the 27th, we're going to have Dr. Diana Pasulka, whose new book is coming out shortly. She keeps saying the date gets pushed back on her, but it's coming out one of these days soon, American Cosmic, and we're going to be able to talk all about that. So we got a busy January lined up for you. So how about that? What do you think about that? Thank you very much for
having brought that up. Yeah, that's fantastic. That way our listeners will know what to look forward to. So thank you.
Yep. So we're good to go here? Ready to wrap up?
Yeah.
All righty.
I think so, yeah.
Have a good one. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you.